Joining me now is my fellow outsider and editor of The Spectator Australia, Rowan Dean. Rowan, let's talk about these nature positive laws that are coming in. You've written and spoken about the government's plan to have this wonderful sounding policy, nature positive. Who doesn't love nature and positive plans? But as you've detailed, this is a dangerous plan that will decimate our mining, agriculture, tourism industries and frustrate many developments, including things like hospitals and housing, all in the name of climate change. But Rowan, I've got to play devil's advocate here. Those advocating for this plan argue it's just about restoring ecosystems and scaling back some of those negative impacts on nature from development.
Rita, that's the argument being put forward, and that's part of the deception, and that's part of the stealth. The Albanese government, if there's one thing it will be remembered for, is it's the devious way it went about trying to implement its hard left, hardcore, Marxist, communist, Fabian, call it what you will, agenda. And this is just another example. Now, you were just speaking to Bev MacArthur about how the Victorian government, with their cultural heritage laws, are bringing forth a whole new raft of what you could call black tape, which will make development very, very difficult. You mentioned people leaving Victoria because of it. But what the nature positive plan is, Rita, is it's all of that on steroids, multiply it by 1,000. Because what the nature positive plan is, if it's one thing, it certainly ain't just about protecting the biodiversity and so on. So the original, what it is, it's they're building on the original Environmental Protection Act, which the Howard government had spent nearly a decade putting together. That's how difficult it was to get the balance between protecting a species which may be at risk and development. Took them a decade to get it right. And what we are left with after that decade is some of the most onerous and restrictive green tape in the world. So just remember that. Already we are seeing, thanks to the Environmental Protection Act, lots of developments, mines, agriculture, farms are being delayed or put on hold for years and years and years because of the lawfare that's developed around that Environmental Protection Act. Now, multiply that by 1,000, Rita. What the Nature Positive Plan does is it's given bureaucrats carte blanche to declare unacceptable impact on critical habitats, neither of which they define, by the way, and on pretty much any land, any development in Australia going forth. If you dig up a plot of ground, if you stick a shovel in the ground, you are automatically come under the umbrella of this act. And it's up to you to self-report, but if you don't, there's all sorts of fines and all sorts of things can go wrong. And what the new Nature Positive Plan does, Rita, is it basically says that the bunch of bureaucrats in Canberra can sit around and decide whether your development goes ahead, and yet the rules aren't defined. So they'll get the act through, and then they've made it very clear they will define what the rules are afterwards. And the worst thing is they admit, Rita, that this is all to do with fossil fuels, preventing fossil fuel development, gas development, oil development, coal, iron ore development, and nuclear development. They regard those things as key criteria in protecting species. They don't mention renewables, by the way, but they also say that there are many, many more threatened species that they're finding every day. You would have thought it would go the other way. You would have thought the threatened species, the extinct ones, there's fewer of them every year. But no, they're saying there's more and more and more and more of them. So basically, and this isn't the cuddly koala, this is, sure, that's part of one over 1,700 threatened species. You're right down to the mealy bug, things you can hardly even see, which are supposedly threatened species. This is the most dangerous piece of legislation for future development in this country. It's going to hurtle us into Argentina-type status, Rita.
Well, Argentina before Malay, please, because we'll need a Malay exactly. If this goes through, because it is going to absolutely frustrate anything that has kept this country afloat. I mean, all those industries and you named, that's why we're not in recession right now. So it's madness. It's madness, and the fact that they're trying to just push it through without any detail is even more sinister.
It's worse than that, Rita,
Now,
because what they're actually doing, they're pretending to have consultancy meetings. And I've spoken to people who've been into these meetings where there is no consultation. The bureaucrats say, here's what we're doing. Oh, by the way, you're not allowed to take any printed material out of these meetings. You're not allowed to contribute anything. You're simply told this is what they're doing. You can take some handwritten notes. It's being done by stealth so that no one knows the details. This is the voice all over again, Rita, but now it affects every single development, future development in this country, even mum and dad, tourism operators, you name it, whatever it is.
Well, at least we had a chance to have a say on The Voice, and that was killed. But this, there's been really so little debate, because we're not talking about years in the future. We're talking about this legislation coming into action, what, in June?
Absolutely, and then they will define all the parameters after the legislation is in place. So they've cobbled this thing together in a matter of months. I watched the full Zoom meeting, that bit of propaganda the bureaucrats put out. I watched it so that the rest of Australia doesn't have to. But I would urge Australia to watch it, because you were talking about the difference between satire and reality, Rita. You cannot tell if this thing is satire or reality. These bureaucrats sit around asking each other questions about how great this thing is going to be, and you can pretty much guarantee from what they're saying that these are the people who will be calling the shots on future development in Australia, and they're going to make it up as they go along, and they are hardcore climate zealots.
Now, Rowan, former Labor Foreign Minister Gareth Evans wants the government to get off the fence and reinstate funding to the UN's agency in Gaza, despite evidence from Israeli intelligence that UNRWA staff were involved in the October 7 attacks. What do you say to Labor's longest-serving Foreign Minister?
Well, I say that he is basically, whether it is his intention or otherwise, what he is doing is providing moral and popular propaganda support for the same people who were involved in butchering, raping, murdering, all sorts of atrocities on October 7th. So people have to be really, really clear. The links between UNRWA, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency, who provide all the aid into Gaza, funded by people like Australia and the Australian taxpayer, they have proven links with Hamas. So you can't deny that. So if you are saying let's get more aid going into UNRWA, you are basically saying let's give more money to the people with proven links to the atrocities of October 7th. If he can live with that on his conscience, good luck to him, but I certainly would not be able to. And as an Australian taxpayer, I utterly resent anybody trying to take 1 cent of my money and giving it through whatever indirect means to the most murderous, barbarous butchers that the world has seen since the Holocaust. Not my money, no way, and every Australian should say the same thing, Rita.
Now, you mentioned moral and propaganda support for Hamas, and the Oscars arguably provided that as well. They were on yesterday, and the celebrities forgot the wise words of former host Ricky Gervais. Remember, he told them, stick to your lane, stick to thanking your God and your agent and get off stage. No, we had a lot of vapid virtue signalling about Palestine. Singer Billie Eilish and Mark Ruffalo, who's an actor, they were wearing these red pins calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. And director Jonathan Glazer, who won an Oscar for his film about Auschwitz, used his acceptance speech to refute his Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation. Let's have a listen.
Our film shows where dehumanisation leads at its worst. It shaped all of our past and present. Right now, we stand here as men who refute their Jewishness and the Holocaust being hijacked by an occupation which has led to conflict for so many innocent people.
Rowan, it wouldn't be an awards show if we didn't have some daft political lectures.
Yeah, well, this was one of the very, very worst, Rita. The sentence that he cobbled together, this is a man who works in the communications industry, and he cobbled together some strange sentence about refuting this, that and the other. But all the world will hear is a Jewish man basically renouncing his Jewishness. And that is what the world will hear. That is what the haters of Jews will applaud and be encouraged by. And that is what young Jews, Jews throughout the world will add to the burden of public shame being forced on them and humiliation by people who hate Jews. This is unacceptable. What this clown set up at the Oscars is unacceptable. I was actually quite looking forward to seeing the movie because it sounds like a very interesting movie about a guy during the Holocaust, a prison guard at Auschwitz or whatever, the commandant who lives in his own house and ignores what's going outside in the real world. Well, that is the perfect metaphor for Hollywood. They're sitting there in their beautiful, comfortable surroundings with all their moral superiority, with all their wealth and riches, ignoring the horror, ignoring the absolute horror of what occurred on October 7th, the barbarity, the savagery, the dehumanity, the evil of it. They're sitting there pontificating moral equivalence. I say again, unless you are wholeheartedly, full-throated in your support for Jews and Israel at this point of time, unless you're demanding and supporting the Israel army in its efforts to destroy Hamas for once and for all, rid the planet of this evil, unless you are full in your support for that enterprise, then I'm afraid you are on the other side. You are supporting that barbarity. You are supporting that savagery. You are turning a blind eye to the most revolting abuses of humanity that have occurred since the Holocaust. And I, for one, condemn you utterly.
Rowan Dean, thank you so much for your time this evening.